So it's that time of the year. It's looking like most of the frosts have finished in my garden. Now, it's only coming towards the end of February, so there is still a very strong chance that frost can come back. But because I'm in the south of the UK, I'm fairly safe to start doing some tidying up to get rid of some of the brown foliage that was frosted off and killed by winter. Now, I'm not going to go mad at this time of the year. I'm not going to start cutting the bananas back because they have soft herbaceous growth, and if I do that too soon, that will get damaged by late frosts. But things like this Woodwardia radicans that has been completely frosted off and is looking untidy, I'm relatively safe to cut these back and wait for the fresh new growth in the next few weeks. I mean, it's really starting to warm up now and nighttime temperatures are getting much better. And as I look closely around the garden, there's quite a few signs that things are bursting into life and it's getting me excited. So I just wanted to come out and do a bit of a tidy up in my small tropical style garden. Now just here is the Woodwardia that I mentioned just now, and it got to quite a good size by late last summer. But it was growing across the path, so it's not actually all that heartbreaking that it needs to be cut back. So I'm just going to cut it back to, there's a knuckle of new fronds emerging, much like in tree ferns. So I'm just going to get my secateurs and cut them right back to there. Now normally I advocate leaving as much leaf litter and cut material on the ground, on the surface of the ground as you can, and that's just going to mimic the way that leaf litter and branches fall to the ground in a rainforest, and they slowly break down and enrich all of that subterranean life, all of the worms and bugs that are going to bring the soil to life and in turn benefit the health of your plants. But for thick, waxy leaves, typically on evergreen plants, like the Woodwardia radicans, they are much slower to break down. And because I've got a small garden, the material that's slower to break down, I don't really have anywhere to wait for it to break down in a manageable way. So I will take that material away, but leaves from deciduous plants, like my roost tree, I just let them fall onto the beds and they break down in no time and really enrich the soil. So I don't have to add that much fertilizer or extra soil in spring and summer because all of that natural cycle is occurring just like it would in a rainforest. So between trips to the recycling centre where I can take all of my garden waste, I like to build it up somewhere that can be useful. And like I say, my garden's quite small, so I haven't got a decent compost heap. So what I actually do is just pile it all onto the surface of my beds. And although it's not breaking down, and it doesn't necessarily look that pretty through the winter months, it does act as a layer of insulation. So when we've had cold weather through December, January and February, all of this organic matter on the top of the soil has acted just like horticultural fleece would, and it's acted as a protective barrier to stop cold penetrating into the soil. So when I've got plants like my Fatsia polycarpa, Schefflera taiwaniana, even if I lose all of the top growth, all of this organic matter is just going to really help protect the root zone from penetrating cold, which increases the chances of these half-hardy and tender plants regrowing from the base in the warmer weather of spring and summer. Now, some material that has been really good for using as a mulch is old banana leaves. And bananas don't look pretty in the depths of winter, but having old leaves like this, which is just a mass of herbaceous material, putting them onto the surface of the bed, that will break down relatively easy and work to add nitrogen into your soil. And remember, nitrogen is what these big leafy plants thrive on. Now, while I'm in this bed tidying up, I've just noticed that this Schefflera taiwaniana, which is clearly stressed after experiencing cold temperatures in December, although it's pushing out tiny new leaves from the top of the stem, that stress has actually triggered it to start shooting all the way up the side of the stem as well. So hopefully I'll have a nice branching example of Schefflera taiwaniana, which will give me much more of this jungly foliage, because right now it's only growing on a single stem and it was starting to look a bit leggy, but it was too precious to me and too expensive for me to risk cutting the top off to see if I could get it to bush out. So nature's done its thing and it's taken the risk for me. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how the new side shoots progress through spring and summer. There's more good news, or at least there was. This stem was one of my favourite plants in the garden last year. It was Sonchus fruticosus, the Madeiran giant tree dandelion, and it had amazing foliage. Now, it was covered in horticultural fleece and the frost clearly got to it, but I didn't dig it up, which I've seen people doing prematurely. Leave your plants in till spring. I left it in and I covered the root zone with mulch and leaf litter just to see if I got any shoots from the base of the plant when the weather warmed. Now, it's only late February, but as I'm clearing up, I'm testing the stem. That's pretty much dead. But looking down to the base of the plant, there was a new shoot. I was all excited to show you that, but when I was getting this close up, I snapped the new growth off. Gutted. Absolutely gutted. But it shows that the plant is still alive and that all of us make mistakes. So I'm just going to put the leaf litter back to where it was. I'm going to cut this main stem just back a bit to stop it being in the way. And hopefully, if I stop interfering, the plant will regrow in spring. And by summer, we will have that amazing giant dandelion foliage again. Now, another job, which isn't quite so fun for this time of year, is finding which plants that I grow in pots that I've left outside to experiment and see just how hardy they might be, to see which ones have coped and which haven't. And you can see here, this Geranium madeirense, probably through lack of water because I forgot I had it, and this Paracerianthes lepantha, which is an acacia-like tree. Neither of them has survived the cold, and plants in pots are much more susceptible to cold conditions because the pot is above ground, so all the frost can penetrate from the side to the root zone, not just from the top. Plants that are in the ground are much better equipped to cope with cold weather. So if you are experimenting, either group your pots together and that will create a much more protected microclimate for the tender plants that you're growing, or just put them in the ground, go for it and see how things work out. But I do have quite a few plants that haven't survived, but it's the only way I'm going to know what plants, what tender and tropical and half-hardy exotic plants I can get away with in my garden. So it's part of the process, and it's not worth getting upset about. It's all a lesson, and that's why I did it. This is my Pseudopanax laetus, which is a really, really nice palmate-leaved evergreen shrub from New Zealand. And it's been perfectly fine in all of the winters that I've been growing it in this garden before. But this past winter has really put it through some stress. And you can see the upper part of the plant has been hit by the cold the most. And it's dropped a lot of material and a lot of the leaves are falling off. But you can see that down inside of the shrub, which would have been more of a frost-free area, is looking much, much better. And there's actually some signs of growth, like this part here. So for the time being, I'm not going to touch this. I'm going to leave it exactly as it is, no matter how ugly it looks. And maybe in about 4 weeks, I'm going to cut this back and reshape the plant and hopefully get lots of new growth when the weather warms. All of these hollow stems that are quite clearly dead belong to a plant called Impatiens tinctoria, which is one of my favourite impatiens. It is an enormous growing plant that has adapted to grow tubers underground, so it can survive winters in a dormant state, and every spring it regrows really quickly. It's got big, lush, jungly green leaves, but it's the flowers. It's a white flowering Impatiens with a speckled red throat, and it's really sweetly scented at night. So I've got this at the back of the border, and I'm just going to cut back all of this growth now to tidy this up, because I know come spring it will regrow very, very quickly. At this time of year, I find it really, really beneficial to have a few evergreen plants in pots that I can move around to fill gaps in the garden as the seasons start to roll by. and it just means that I can keep everything looking as good as possible and without actually having to buy plants spring, summer and autumn. So I've got these Libertia grandiflora, which is an evergreen grass. Now they're looking a little bit tatty and they could do with a bit of tidying up. I'll remove some of the brown leaves. But I've had these for years in these pots, and it just means that when I've done my clearing after winter and the garden's looking a bit bare, I've got something that I can just sit as a kind of a filler plant to give me something to look at while everything else is establishing ready for summer. I actually do the same thing at the back of this narrow border that flanks the garden path. I have these ferns, which are really nice, tough evergreen ferns. I can't remember. I don't need to remember, they've still got the label on. Polysticum munitum. I'll put the name on screen. They're really tough ferns, and I just move these around all summer, winter and spring. So at the moment, they are providing a nice green backdrop to this bed, which is looking quite bare because all of the plants are herbaceous perennials. There is one plant in here though that has stayed evergreen and is typically a house plant, and I've featured it on this channel before. It's just down here. This is my Saxifraga stolonifera, and I've showed you this on the channel before. Now this was just one plant that I put out into the garden, and it has spread by stolons, hence its name, stolonifera, and has created a really nice ground cover plant. And this will actually produce masses of tiny white flowers that dance in a gentle breeze. So I'm really looking forward to all of this ground cover flowering now. But if you live somewhere that gets relatively mild winters most of the time, this is definitely worth a go. Now its common name is the strawberry begonia because it has bright red leaf undersides and kind of begonia-esque foliage markings. But it's not a begonia at all, it's a Saxifraga, and you'll find it in houseplant sections of your garden centre or online shopping because it's not typically sold as a garden plant, but it shows that it's well worth trying. And I know that at this time of year I go on and on about evergreens, but they really are invaluable for providing that tropical style in your garden all year round, and it's a bit of winter structure as well. If you just grow everything herbaceous like canna and banana plants, they're just going to die to ground level and you're just going to be looking at bare soil. Your garden's going to look like an allotment rather than a lush jungle. So one of my favourite evergreens is this euphorbia, and it's a hybrid, Euphorbia cross pasteuri. So it's Euphorbia mellifera crossed with a much rarer euphorbia, which is Euphorbia stygiana, that originates from the Azores. And I rave about this plant because it is so vigorous. You might have heard the phrase hybrid vigour before, and that's because this plant has fresh genetics, so it just grows so quickly. If you can find this cultivar called John Phillips, so its full name, it's a bit of a mouthful, Euphorbia cross pasteuri cultivar John Phillips. It's an amazing plant, and sometimes I'll call it the parrot plant because when it gets cold stressed, you get these red leaves which have amazing coloration and add great winter interest, and then they'll drop to the ground, mulch away, and you'll get these sweet honey-scented flowers in spring. So that's me almost done tidying up the garden, ready for spring. Now in doing this and leaving some of the half-hardy and tender plants in, I'm going to have time to see what regrows and what gaps I've actually got that I have to spend money on replanting. Or of course you can grow your own plants by division or propagating them from seed, which I will be doing in the next video. I'm going to show you some of the plants I'm growing for the nursery, the online shop, and for my own garden from seed. And at this time of the year, I'm absolutely overrun with seedlings, so I'm excited to share it with you. Now let me know what plants you're cutting back, and ask any questions. If there's things you want to know, if you need to leave it a while, or perhaps give it extra protection, and either me or someone else in the Grow Paradise community will get back to you. I'll see you in the next video.